Part 1. The Careful Construction. Chapter 1. The New Transfer. Jay Mercer had learned to hate his reflection by the time he turned 23. Not because of any physical flaw, his features were sharp and aristocratic, dark hair falling across his forehead in a way that photographers had once called devastating. No, Jay hated his reflection because of what it represented, an enigma, the rarest and most dangerous secondary gender classification known to modern science. A designation that made him a monster in the eyes of society, a predator too powerful to be trusted. Enigmas sat atop the biological hierarchy, above even alphas. They possessed the alpha's dominance and strength, combined with an omega's ability to conceive and bear children. But that wasn't what made them dangerous. It was their pheromones, intoxicating, overwhelming, capable of bringing even the strongest alpha to their knees. An enigma's scent could override consent itself, which was why they were feared, regulated, and in some countries, simply eliminated at birth. Jay had spent his entire life on suppressants so powerful they made his bones ache. He wore scent blockers that left chemical burns on his skin. He'd undergone weekly injections since puberty that left him nauseated for days, all to pass as a beta, to live something resembling a normal life. And he'd been successful. Until 6 months ago, when his control had shattered. The memory still made his hands shake. The university library, late evening, and Mark Chun pressing him against the shelves between Eastern philosophy and religious studies. Mark, his boyfriend of 8 months, an alpha who'd never suspected what Jay really was. They'd been ugwang, Jay couldn't even remember about what now, and Mark had grabbed his wrist, hard enough to bruise. Something in Jay had snapped. His pheromones had exploded outward like a bomb detonating. His enigma scent had flooded the entire 3rd floor in seconds. And Mark, poor Mark, had dropped to his knees immediately, his eyes glazing over, his body trembling with unwanted arousal. Jay had run. He'd left Mark there on the floor, had fled the building with his heart hammering and his skin crawling with horror at what he'd done. By the time campus security had found Mark an hour later, the alpha had been unconscious, his body in shock from pheromone overload. The official report had been inconclusive. The security footage had mysteriously corrupted. Mark himself claimed not to remember anything clearly, but Jay knew the truth. He was a danger to everyone around him. The suppressants weren't enough anymore. His control was deteriorating. So he'd done the only thing he could do. He'd transferred universities, moved to a different city, and started over with even stronger suppressants and a promise to himself that he would never, ever let anyone close again. Which brought him here, to Crescent Bay University, standing in front of the Administrative Sciences building on a grey October morning, trying to convince himself to walk through those doors. You planning to stand there all day, or are you actually going to go inside? Jay startled, turning to find someone watching him from the bench beside the entrance. A young man, maybe his age or a little younger, with honey brown hair that caught the weak autumn sunlight and eyes the color of dark amber. He was beautiful in an understated way, with delicate features that seemed almost deliberately unremarkable until you really looked at him. A beta, Jay's instincts told him immediately. The lack of distinctive scent confirmed it. Sorry, Jay said, forcing a polite smile. First day nerves. Transfer student, the man stood, and Jay noticed he was several inches shorter than Jay's 6 feet, with a slim build that made him seem younger than he probably was. He wore Warramud glasses that kept sliding down his nose, and he pushed them up in a gesture that seemed habitual. I'm Tom Reeves, 4th year Business Administration. Jay Mercer, 3rd year, switching to economics. Tom's smile was warm and surprisingly disarming. Welcome to Crescent Bay. Fair warning, the economics department is located in the oldest building on campus. The heating system is temperamental, and Professor Matunas still uses actual chalk on an actual chalkboard. Despite himself, Jay felt some of his tension ease. Sounds charming. It's character building, Tom said dryly. He tilted his head, studying Jay with an intensity that seemed at odds with his gentle appearance. You look stressed. Want me to show you around? I've got an hour before my next class. Every instinct Jay had screamed at him to say no, to keep his distance, to remain alone the way he'd promised himself he would. But there was something about Tom, something calm and unthreatening about his beta presence, that made Jay's guard lower fractionally. Sure, Jay heard himself say, that would be helpful. Tom's smile widened just slightly, and for a moment, something flickered in those amber eyes, something that might have been satisfaction or calculation or nothing at all. But Jay didn't notice. He was too busy trying to keep his pheromones locked down, his secret safe, his walls high. He didn't notice Tom's smile, or the way Tom's pupils dilated briefly when Jay moved closer, or the barely perceptible way Tom inhaled, as if trying to catch a scent that shouldn't be there. He didn't notice that Tom's supposedly beta-neutral scent had the faintest undercurrent of something else, something that no beta should possess. And he certainly didn't notice the way Tom's hand trembled slightly as he gestured toward the building, as if he were fighting to control something powerful beneath his carefully constructed surface. "Come on," Tom said, his voice perfectly pleasant, perfectly normal. "Let me show you around your new home." And Jay, believing himself to be the only monster in this conversation, followed. Chapter 2: The Careful Approach. Tom Reeves had been pretending to be a beta for so long that sometimes he almost believed it himself. Almost. But not when he sat alone in his apartment at night, suppressants wearing off, feeling the true weight of what he was pressing against the inside of his skin, like a caged animal testing the bars. Not when he caught himself calculating and manipulating every social interaction with a precision that came far too naturally. And definitely not when someone like Jay Mercer walked into his life, radiating the kind of power that made Tom's enigma nature rear up in recognition and hunger. Because Tom was an enigma too, and unlike Jay, he'd learned long ago that the best cage was one you built yourself. He'd been watching Jay for 3 days now, not in person, but through the careful digital footprint everyone left behind. The transfer paperwork that had crossed his desk, Tom volunteered in the registrar's office specifically for this kind of access. The medical records he'd glimpsed during his work-study position at the campus health center, technically illegal, but who was counting? The social media profiles that Jay had locked down, but not before Tom had scraped them clean of information. Jay Mercer, 23 years old, transferred from Sterling University under mysterious circumstances. No official disciplinary record, but there was a 6-month gap in his social media activity that coincided with an incident at Sterling's library that had sent an alpha student to the hospital. Medical records showed Jay on Category 5 suppressants, the strongest legally available, the kind only prescribed to enigmas. Tom had known what Jay was the moment he'd seen that prescription list. And God, wasn't that interesting? Another enigma here, trying so hard to be invisible. An enigma who clearly didn't know how to control his power, who wore his guilt and fear like a second skin. An enigma who, unlike Tom, hadn't yet learned that the only way to be safe in this world was to control everything and everyone around you. Tom had decided within 5 minutes of reading Jay's file that he wanted him. Not just wanted, needed to possess him, to own him, to take all that beautiful, terrible power and make it his. Tom had never met another enigma before. He'd been alone his entire life with this secret, this hunger, this constant calculation, the thought of having someone who could understand, who could match him. But only if that someone belonged to him completely. Which was why, when Jay had stood frozen outside the Administrative Sciences building that morning, Tom had approached with his most harmless beta persona firmly in place. Wire-rimmed glasses, clear glass, purely aesthetic, carefully bland clothing, posture just slightly stooped to minimize his height, and that gentle, forgettable smile he'd practiced in the mirror for years. "You look stressed," Tom had said, and Jay's shoulders had come down half an inch, his guard lowering at the perceived safety of a beta's presence. "Perfect." Now, as Tom led Jay through the campus, he maintained a careful distance, close enough to seem friendly, far enough to avoid triggering Jay's instincts. He kept his voice light, his manner helpful, his pheromones locked down so tightly it made his head ache. "The library's actually pretty decent," Tom was saying, gesturing toward the modern glass building at the campus center. "4th floor is the quiet study area. Nobody goes there except during finals." Jay nodded, but Tom saw the way his jaw tightened at the mention of the library. Still traumatized from the Sterling incident then. Interesting. "You okay?" Tom asked, infusing his voice with just the right amount of concern. "Fine," Jay said quickly. "Just had a bad experience in a library once." "Want to skip that part of the tour?" Jay glanced at him, surprise flickering across his features. Tom knew what he was thinking. Most people would push for details, would pry. But Tom had learned that the fastest way to make someone trust you was to give them space while making it clear you were available to fill it. "Thanks," Jay said, and his posture relaxed another degree. They walked in silence for a moment, and Tom used the time to study Jay more carefully. Up close, the other enigma was even more compelling than his photographs had suggested. There was a contained violence in the way he moved, a coiled tension in his shoulders, as if he were constantly preparing for a fight. His dark eyes were shadowed with exhaustion, the suppressants probably combined with stress and lack of sleep. Tom wanted to peel back every layer, to find all the broken places underneath and press his fingers into them until Jay shattered. But patience, always patience. "So what made you transfer to Crescent Bay?" Tom asked casually as they walked past the student union. Jay's expression shuttered immediately, just needed a change of scenery. Liar, but Tom just nodded understandingly. Fair enough, sometimes a fresh start is exactly what you need. They continued the tour, Tom keeping up a steady stream of harmless information: where to get the best coffee, the indie place off campus, not the chain, which professes to avoid. Martinez's chalk habits aside, he was actually brilliant, where the decent food was definitely not the dining hall. By the time they'd circled back to the Administrative Sciences building, Jay's walls had lowered significantly. He was actually smiling at something Tom had said, his dark eyes crinkling at the corners, and Tom felt a savage satisfaction bloom in his chest. "Thanks for this," Jay said, adjusting his backpack. "Really, made things a lot less intimidating." "No problem." Tom pushed his glasses up his nose in that carefully practiced gesture. "Actually, I'm usually at the library most afternoons. 4th floor if you ever want company while you study. I promise to be quiet." He saw Jay hesitate, saw the instinct to refuse, to maintain distance. But then Jay's expression softened, as if he were reminding himself that Tom was safe, just a harmless beta who'd shown him kindness. "Maybe," Jay said, "I'll think about it." "Got you," Tom thought, but what he said was, "Cool, well, I should get to class. See you around, Jay." He walked away before Jay could respond, moving with a beta's forgettable gait, just another unremarkable student in the crowd. But once he was out of sight, Tom let himself lean against a wall, breathing hard. Keeping his pheromones contained around another Enigma was exponentially harder than around normal people. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to dominate, to claim, to make Jay submit to the stronger Enigma presence. Because Tom knew he was stronger. He'd been controlling his nature since he was 12 years old, since the day his Enigma presentation had killed his alpha father and sent his omega mother into shock-induced labor that had killed her too. The social workers had written it off as a tragic accident, never realizing what the child in the room actually was. Tom had learned that day that his power was absolute, and he'd learned that if he wanted to survive, he'd have to hide it completely. 16 years later, his control was perfect, unbreakable. And now he'd use that control to break Jay Mercer into pieces and rebuild him into something that belonged to Tom alone. Phase 1 was complete: establish contact, seem harmless, plant the seed of friendship. Phase 2 would be harder: become indispensable to Jay's life while slowly, carefully, making Jay emotionally dependent on him. And Phase 3, well, Phase 3 would be the most delicate part. The part where Tom would arrange circumstances to make Jay lose control of his Enigma nature, directed at Tom this time. Because Tom had learned something crucial over years of studying Enigma psychology, his own psychology, really. Though he'd had to couch it in academic research, Enigmas craved control above all else. And paradoxically, the fastest way to make an Enigma bond to you was to make them believe they'd stolen your choice, forced you into submission. The guilt and shame would chain them more effectively than any collar. Tom smiled to himself as he headed toward his class, already planning his next move. He'd seen the medical records. Jay's suppressants were barely working anymore. It would take so little to push him over the edge. A stressful situation, some careful pheromone manipulation, and Jay's control would shatter. All Tom had to do was make sure he was the target when it happened. Then Jay would be his, bound by guilt and shame, and the mistaken belief that he'd forced Tom into something Tom had orchestrated from the very beginning. Perfect. Tom's phone buzzed, a calendar reminder. He had to pick up his own suppressants from the pharmacy this afternoon, the illegal ones he'd been buying since he was 16, the ones 10 times stronger than anything a doctor would prescribe. The ones that kept his Enigma nature buried so deep that even other Enigmas couldn't sense what he was. Tom silenced the reminder and kept walking, his expression pleasantly blank, just another beta student worried about grades and career prospects. No one looked at him twice. And that was exactly how he wanted it. At least until Jay looked at him and saw not a harmless beta, but a possession, a victim, someone Jay had forced and therefore owed everything to. Tom could be patient. He'd been patient his whole life. What was a few more weeks? Chapter 3: The Slow Entanglement. 3 weeks passed, and Jay found himself spending more and more time with Tom. It hadn't been intentional, That first afternoon, Jay had gone to the fourth floor of the library out of sheer stubbornness. He refused to let his trauma from Sterling dictate his actions. Tom had been there, as promised, tucked into a corner desk with his laptop and a truly impressive stack of textbooks. He'd looked up when Jay arrived, smiled that gentle smile and said, "Hey, want to share the desk? There's plenty of room." Jay should have refused, should have found his own space, maintained his distance. But the suppressants had given him a headache that made his vision blur, and Tom's calm beta presence was so safe compared to the overwhelming sense of the alphas and omegas filling the lower floors. So he'd sat down. And Tom had kept his promise. He'd been quiet, focused on his work, only occasionally sharing a commiserating look when they both hit particularly frustrating sections of their assignments. After 2 hours, Tom had stood up, stretched, and said, "I'm going to get coffee. Want anything?" "I'm fine," Jay had said automatically. Tom had returned 15 minutes later with 2 cups anyway. "Decaf," he'd explained, setting one in front of Jay. "Figured caffeine on top of what I'm assuming are pretty serious meds probably isn't great." Jay had stared at the cup, something uncomfortable twisting in his chest. When was the last time someone had thought about his well-being without him asking? "Thanks," he'd managed. Tom had just shrugged and gone back to his work. That had been 3 weeks ago. Now it was routine. Jay showed up at the library most afternoons, and Tom was always there, calm and unthreatening, and somehow exactly what Jay needed after days of holding himself rigid and controlled around everyone else. They'd started studying together, then getting dinner together, then taking walks around campus when they both needed to clear their heads. Tom never pried into Jay's history, never asked invasive questions, never commented on the days when Jay looked particularly exhausted or when his hands shook from the suppressants. He was just there, steady, safe. And Jay, despite all his promises to himself, was starting to depend on that. "You're distracted," Tom said now, glancing up from his laptop. They were in Tom's apartment, a studio near campus that was small but meticulously organized, everything in its place. Tom had invited Jay over to work on their respective papers in a less institutionalized environment, and Jay had agreed before he could stop himself. "Sorry," Jay muttered, dragging his attention back to his economics assignment. "Just tired." "You're always tired lately." Tom's voice was concerned, and when Jay looked up, those amber eyes were studying him with an intensity that should have felt intrusive but somehow didn't. "Are you sleeping okay?" "Well enough." "Jay," Tom closed his laptop, giving Jay his full attention. "I know we haven't known each other that long, but I can tell something's wrong. You don't have to tell me what it is, but you can't keep running yourself into the ground like this." Jay's jaw tightened. Tom didn't understand, couldn't understand that the exhaustion wasn't optional, that the suppressants he took were destroying his body slowly but surely, and that without them, he'd destroy everyone around him. "I'm fine," he said, but his voice came out harsher than he intended. Tom flinched slightly, and immediately Jay felt like shit. Tom was being kind, and Jay was snapping at him like an asshole. "Sorry," Jay said quickly. "I didn't mean, I'm just stressed about the midterms." Tom's expression softened. "I know, me too." He paused, then said carefully, "Have you thought about talking to someone? The campus health center has counselors who—" "No," the word came out sharp, final. Jay couldn't risk anyone in the health center looking too closely at his records, his prescriptions, his secondary gender status. "Okay," Tom said immediately, backing off. "That's okay, just, if you ever need to talk, I'm here, no judgment." And that was the thing about Tom that made Jay's careful walls crumble piece by piece. He always knew when to push and when to retreat. He offered support without demanding anything in return. He was present without being overwhelming. He was everything Jay needed, and nothing he'd feared. Which should have been a warning sign if Jay had been thinking clearly. But Jay wasn't thinking clearly. The suppressants were fucking with his head. The isolation of being the only enigma in a sea of oblivious betas and alphas and omegas was crushing, and Tom was the only person who made him feel even remotely human. So when Tom suggested they take a break and watch something mindless on Netflix, Jay agreed. And when they ended up sitting close together on Tom's small couch, their shoulders touching, Jay didn't move away. And when Tom fell asleep halfway through the movie, his head dropping onto Jay's shoulder, something in Jay's chest clenched painfully at the trust implied in that unconscious gesture. Tom trusted him. This fragile beta trusted the monster enough to fall asleep on his shoulder. Jay sat frozen, barely breathing. Watching Tom's peaceful expression, and feeling something dangerous unfurl in his chest. Something possessive and protective and absolutely forbidden. He couldn't afford this, couldn't afford to care about anyone, especially not someone as vulnerable as a beta. But Tom's weight against his side felt like an anchor, and for the first time in 6 months, Jay didn't feel like he was drowning. This is a mistake, he told himself. But he didn't move. Tom woke up exactly 90 seconds after he'd fallen asleep, but he kept his breathing even, his body relaxed, giving no sign of consciousness. Through slitted eyes, he watched Jay's reflection in the dark television screen, watched the conflict play across his features, the way his hand hovered near Tom's head as if he wanted to touch but didn't dare. Perfect. Establishing physical contact was crucial to the next phase of Tom's plan. He needed Jay to get used to his presence, his touch, his proximity. Needed Jay's Enigma instincts to start seeing Tom as something to protect. And then, when Tom arranged for Jay to lose control, those same possessive instincts would make the betrayal cut even deeper. Tom had researched every aspect of this seduction, because that's what it was, really, even if Jay didn't realize it yet. He'd studied the psychology of trauma bonds, of codependency, of guilt-based attachment. He'd learned that the most unbreakable chains were the ones people forged themselves. And Jay was forging them beautifully. Tom counted to 300, then let his breathing shift into the pattern of someone waking naturally. He blinked, lifted his head and said groggily, "Shit, sorry, did I fall asleep on you?" "It's fine," Jay said, but his voice was rough, and he moved away quickly, putting distance between them. Tom let a bit of embarrassment show on his face. "That's really unprofessional of me, I should probably." "It's fine," Jay repeated, but gentler this time. "You've been helping me all afternoon, you're allowed to be tired." Tom pushed his glasses up his nose and offered a self-deprecating smile. "I'm usually better about not using people as pillows." "I didn't mind." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither of them acknowledged. "I should probably head home," Jay said after a moment, already gathering his things. "Got an early class tomorrow." "Yeah, of course." Tom stood, maintaining his careful beta mannerisms, nothing threatening, nothing that would trigger Jay's defensive instincts. "Same time Thursday at the library." "Yeah, Thursday." Tom walked Jay to the door, and just before Jay left, Tom did something calculated and dangerous. He reached out and touched Jay's arm, just briefly, just a moment of contact, skin on skin where Jay's sleeve had ridden up. "Thanks for keeping me company today," Tom said softly. Jay's pupils dilated fractionally at the touch, his Enigma instincts responding despite his suppressants. Tom saw the moment Jay registered the reaction, saw the flash of panic in his eyes. "No problem," Jay managed, and then he was gone, practically fleeing into the hallway. Tom closed the door and allowed himself a slow, satisfied smile. He'd felt it, the spark of Jay's pheromones trying to respond to his touch, struggling against the suppressants. Jay was attracted to him, even if he didn't want to admit it. The enigma in him was recognizing something in Tom, even though Tom's own suppressants should have hidden his nature completely. Which meant Jay's instincts were stronger than his medication. Which meant the timeline for Phase 2 could be accelerated. Tom walked to his bathroom, opened the medicine cabinet, and pulled out his suppressants. The pills were small and white, prescribed under false name to a P.O. box in the next city over. The bottle was labeled as blood pressure medication, but the chemical composition was something that didn't officially exist. A black market drug, designed specifically to suppress Enigma pheromones so completely that even other Enigmas couldn't detect them. Tom had been taking them since he was 16. They cost a fortune and caused damage to his endocrine system that would probably kill him before he turned 40, but they were necessary. Because Tom's Enigma nature, when unsuppressed, was powerful enough to affect people's memories. He discovered this accidentally when he was 14, during an argument with his foster father. He'd gotten angry, his pheromones had spiked, and the man had forgotten why he'd been shouting, forgotten his anger entirely, and instead had looked at Tom with confused affection. That's when Tom had realized the true scope of his power, and that's when he'd decided he needed to hide it absolutely, completely, until he chose to reveal it. Until he found someone worth revealing it for. Someone like Jay. Tom took his evening dose, feeling the familiar bitter taste, the way the pills made his mouth go numb. He looked at his reflection in the bathroom mirror, wire-rimmed glasses, gentle expression, harmless beta face. "Just a few more weeks," he told his reflection, "then he's yours." His reflection smiled back, and for just a moment, with his guard down in the privacy of his own apartment, his real nature showed through. The smile wasn't gentle at all. It was predatory, calculating, hungry. The smile of something that had finally found prey worth hunting. Tom turned off the light and went to bed, already planning his next move. Chapter 4: The Stress Fracture. Midterms hit Crescent Bay University like a storm, and Jay felt himself fracturing under the pressure. It wasn't just the exams, though those were brutal enough. It was the combination of academic stress, the ever-increasing dosage of his suppressants. His doctor had bumped him up to Category 6, which wasn't supposed to be legal but was being done off the books, and the growing attachment to Tom that Jay couldn't seem to control. He was spending almost all his free time with Tom now, studying together, eating together, just existing in the same space together. Tom had this way of making everything seem manageable, his calm presence acting like a buffer against the chaos of Jay's deteriorating control. But it was getting harder to hide the symptoms. His hands shook constantly now. He'd lost weight because the suppressants made everything taste like ash. He had headaches that made light feel like knives in his eyes. And worst of all, his pheromones were leaking through despite the medication, subtle enough that most people didn't notice, but enough that alphas had started giving him wary looks and omegas crossed to the other side of the hallway when they saw him coming. Tom noticed, of course Tom noticed. But he didn't comment, didn't pry, just stayed close and steady like an anchor in a storm. "You need to eat something," Tom said now, pushing a sandwich across the library desk they were sharing. It was 2 days before Jay's economics midterm, and he'd been staring at the same page of notes for 20 minutes without absorbing a single word. "Not hungry." "Jay," Tom's voice was firm, carrying an edge Jay had never heard before. "You've lost at least 10 pounds in the last month. You need to eat." "I'm fine." "You're not fine." Tom closed his own textbook and fixed Jay with a look that was uncharacteristically intense. "I don't know what's going on with you, and I'm not going to force you to tell me, but I'm not going to sit here and watch you destroy yourself either." Something in Jay's chest constricted painfully. "Why do you care?" The question came out more vulnerable than he'd intended, and Tom's expression softened immediately. "Because you're my friend," Tom said quietly, "and friends don't let friends fall apart." Friend, the word shouldn't have hurt, but it did because Jay wanted. God, what did he want? He couldn't have anything with anyone, couldn't allow himself to want, but somehow Tom had slipped past every defense he'd built, and now Jay was in free fall with no idea how to stop. "Eat the sandwich," Tom said, gentler now, "please." Jay picked up the sandwich. It tasted like nothing, but he forced himself to eat it anyway, if only because the concern in Tom's eyes made something in him twist painfully. They studied in silence for another hour, but Jay couldn't focus. His head was pounding, his hands were shaking, and underneath it all, he could feel his control slipping. The Enigma nature he'd been suppressing for so long was pressing against his skin like something alive, demanding release. Hold it together, he told himself. Just get through midterms, then you can crash, adjust your medication, figure this out. But his body had other plans. It happened fast. One moment Jay was reading about market equilibrium curves, and the next his vision went white at the edges. Pain exploded behind his eyes, sharp and absolute. His pheromones, suppressed for so long, surged outward in a wave he couldn't control. He heard Tom inhale sharply, heard chairs scraping as other students suddenly stood and moved away, their instincts screaming at them to get distance from the apex predator in their midst. "Shit," Jay managed, trying desperately to rein himself back in, but the control was gone. His Enigma nature was flooding the space around him, thick and overwhelming and absolutely undeniable. "Jay," Tom's voice cut through the haze, "look at me." Jay forced his eyes to focus. Tom was still sitting beside him, hadn't moved, wasn't running like everyone else. His face was pale, his pupils blown wide, but his voice was steady. "We need to get you out of here," Tom said. "Can you walk?" Jay nodded, not trusting his voice. Tom stood, and Jay saw the tremor in his legs, the way Tom's hands clenched the edge of the desk as if he needed support. The Enigma pheromones were affecting him. Of course they were, he was a beta, they'd affect him worse than anyone, but he wasn't running. Why wasn't he running? Tom grabbed Jay's arm, his touch grounding, and pulled him toward the emergency exit. Jay stumbled after him, his mind whiting out with pain and panic and the awful awareness that he'd just lost control in front of dozens of witnesses. They made it outside into the cold November air, and Jay collapsed against the brick wall, gasping. His pheromones were still pouring out, and he could see their effect on Tom. The beta's breathing had gone ragged, his face flushed, his body trembling with the effort of staying upright. "I'm sorry," Jay choked out. "Tom, I'm so sorry, you need to get away from me." "Shut up," Tom said, and his voice was shaking but determined. He pressed closer instead of moving away, and Jay made a sound of protest because no, Tom didn't understand what Jay could do to him. "Your apartment," Tom managed. "How far?" 10 minutes, Tom, you can't." "We're going to your apartment," Tom said, his words slurring slightly now, the pheromones affecting his cognition. "Because you can't stay here and you can't go through this alone. I could hurt you." "You won't," Tom's hand found Jay's, squeezed hard. "I trust you, now move." And because Jay's control was shattered, and his judgment was compromised, and Tom's hand in his felt like the only real thing in the world, he moved. They made it to Jay's apartment, a small studio off campus that Jay had specifically chosen for its distance from other students. Jay's hands shook so badly he couldn't get the key in the lock, and Tom had to do it, his own hands barely steadier. The door closed behind them and Jay slid down the wall, his body finally giving out. His pheromones filled the small space instantly, thick and overwhelming. Tom made a sound, something between a gasp and a moan, and Jay wanted to die. "You need to leave," Jay said desperately. "Tom, please, I can't control this, and I could do something unforgivable." "Jay," Tom dropped to his knees in front of him, close enough that Jay could see the tremor in his jaw, the way his pupils had overtaken nearly all the amber of his irises. "I'm not leaving you. You don't understand what I am." "I know exactly what you are." Tom's voice was rough, affected by the pheromones but still somehow steady. "You're an enigma. You've been on suppressants that aren't working anymore, and you're terrified you're going to hurt someone like you did at Sterling." Jay stared at him, shock cutting through even the haze of his pheromone surge. "How?" "I volunteer in the registrar's office. I've seen your medical records." Tom's hand came up to cup Jay's face, and the touch sent electricity through Jay's entire nervous system. "And I'm still here, because I don't think you're a monster, Jay. I think you're someone who's been alone for way too long." Something broke in Jay's chest. The kindness in Tom's words, the acceptance, the absolute lack of fear, even when Tom's body was clearly screaming at him to submit, to give in to the Enigma's overwhelming presence. It was too much. Jay surged forward and kissed him. It was desperate and graceless, more collision than kiss, but Tom made a sound and kissed back. His hands fisted in Jay's shirt, pulling him closer even as his body trembled with the effort of staying coherent under the onslaught of Enigma pheromones. Jay tried to pull back, tried to regain some control, but Tom followed, his mouth hungry and demanding despite the way his beta nature should have made him pliant. He was fighting the instinct to submit, Jay realized. Fighting to stay present, to stay himself, even though every biological imperative must be telling him to surrender. "Tom," Jay gasped against his mouth. "Tom, stop, I can't. This isn't you, it's the pheromones." "I don't care," Tom breathed, and he kissed Jay again, deeper this time, his tongue sliding against Jay's in a way that made Jay's brain short-circuit. "I don't care what's causing it. I want this, want you." And that was it, the last thread of Jay's control, snapped completely. His Enigma nature roared to the surface, demanding, consuming. He pushed Tom back against the floor, covering his smaller body with his own, and Tom didn't resist. Tom arched up into him, making sounds that went straight to Jay's hindbrain, his beta scent mixing with Jay's pheromones until the air was thick with it. "Tell me to stop," Jay demanded, his voice rougher than he'd ever heard it. "Tom, tell me to stop." "No," Tom's hands slid under Jay's shirt, nails dragging across his skin. "Don't stop, please don't stop." Later, much later, Jay would remember that moment as the point of no return, the moment he damned himself completely. But in the moment, all he could think was mine. They didn't make it to the bed. Jay took Tom right there on the floor of his apartment, his control completely shattered, his Enigma nature driving him with a ferocity he'd never experienced. And Tom didn't submit the way a beta should have under the onslaught of Enigma pheromones. He fought, he demanded, he met Jay's intensity with his own. His nails left scratches down Jay's back, his teeth left marks on Jay's neck. He wrapped his legs around Jay's waist and pulled him deeper, harder, and when Jay tried to slow down, tried to be gentle, Tom snarled, "Don't you dare hold back now." So Jay didn't. He pinned Tom's wrists above his head with one hand and used the other to prep him roughly, too fast, not enough care. But Tom just moaned and pressed back against his fingers, his body opening for Jay like it had been waiting for this, like it had been made for this. "Please," Tom gasped, and the word in his voice, the need, the desperation, destroyed Jay's last hesitation. He pushed inside Tom in one brutal thrust, and Tom's back arched off the floor, his mouth falling open in a silent cry. Jay froze, horror cutting through the haze of pheromones because he was hurting him, but then Tom's legs locked around him and Tom's voice, wrecked and perfect, said, "Move. Jay, please move." And Jay moved. He fucked Tom hard and desperate on the floor of his apartment, their clothes half torn off, their bodies slick with sweat. Tom took everything Jay gave him and demanded more, his hands clawing at Jay's shoulders, his hips rolling up to meet every thrust. "Yours," Tom gasped at one point, the pheromones clearly affecting his mind now. "Yours, Jay, I'm yours." The words shouldn't have affected Jay the way they did. Tom wasn't in his right mind, wasn't capable of consent under these circumstances. But Jay's enigma nature seized on the words, on the submission, and something possessive and terrible bloomed in his chest. He bit down on Tom's neck, not hard enough to break skin, but hard enough to mark, to claim, and Tom made a sound that might have been a sob or a moan. His body went taut beneath Jay, and he came untouched, spilling between their bodies as Jay continued to thrust into him. The sensation of Tom clenching around him was too much. Jay followed him over the edge, his orgasm tearing through him with an intensity that whited out his vision. His pheromones spiked one final time, and Tom cried out, his body convulsing through a second orgasm. Then it was over. Jay collapsed on top of Tom, his body shaking, his mind slowly, agonizingly coming back online. And with consciousness came the full, crushing weight of what he'd just done. He'd lost control. He'd flooded Tom with Enigma pheromones. He'd forced Tom's body to respond, had overwhelmed his will, had taken him without true consent because no one could give consent under those circumstances. Jay rolled off Tom immediately, scrambling backward until his back hit the wall. His hands were shaking worse than ever, and his stomach was churning with horror. "Oh God," he whispered. "Oh God, what did I do?" Tom lay where Jay had left him, sprawled on the floor, his body marked with bruises and scratches and the clear evidence of what they'd done. His chest was heaving, his glasses were somewhere across the room, and there was a dazed quality to his eyes that made Jay want to vomit. "Tom," Jay choked out. "Tom, I'm so sorry, I'm so fucking sorry, I couldn't control it." Tom stirred, blinking slowly. He pushed himself up on his elbows, wincing at the movement, and Jay saw the way his hands shook, saw the marks Jay's fingers had left on his wrists. "It's okay," Tom said, but his voice was rough, wrecked. "It's not okay," Jay's voice cracked. "I forced you, my pheromones, you couldn't consent." "Jay, you need to leave," Jay was crying now, he realized distantly. "You need to get out of here and go to the police or campus security, or—" "Jay, stop," Tom's voice cut through his spiral, firmer now. He'd managed to sit up fully, was pulling his clothes back into some semblance of order. "I'm not going to the police." "You should, I assaulted you." "You didn't," Tom's eyes found Jay's, and there was something in them that Jay couldn't read. "I wanted it. Maybe the pheromones intensified it, but I wanted you, Jay. I've wanted you for weeks." "You don't mean that, you can't mean that. The pheromones." "The pheromones didn't create feelings that weren't already there." Tom found his glasses, put them on with shaking hands. "They just lowered my inhibitions, made me act on what I'd been feeling anyway." Jay shook his head desperately. This was wrong. Tom was in shock, was rationalizing what had happened to him because the alternative was too horrifying. Jay had seen it before, victims convincing themselves it wasn't assault, that they'd wanted it, because accepting the truth was unbearable. "I'm going to call someone," Jay said, reaching for his phone. "The crisis line, or—" Tom crossed the space between them faster than Jay expected, plucked the phone from Jay's hands, and set it aside. Then he cupped Jay's face, forcing Jay to look at him. "Listen to me," Tom said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I'm not a victim. I knew what you were before I came here. I knew the risk. And I chose to stay anyway because I wanted to be with you. You don't understand what you're saying." "I understand perfectly." Tom's thumbs brushed away Jay's tears. "You're an enigma. You lost control, but you didn't force me into anything I didn't want, and I'm not going to let you destroy yourself over this." Jay stared at him, torn between desperate hope and crushing guilt, because part of him, the selfish, terrible part, wanted to believe Tom, wanted to accept that this could somehow be okay, that he hadn't just committed the worst act imaginable. But he knew better. He'd seen Mark at Sterling, seen how the Alpha had rationalized what happened to him, because accepting that he'd been violated by Enigma pheromones was too much to bear. "I'm a monster," Jay whispered. "You're not." Tom leaned forward, rested his forehead against Jay's. You're someone who's been fighting his nature for so long that when it finally broke free, you didn't know how to handle it. But that doesn't make you a monster. It makes you human. I hurt you. You marked me, Tom corrected. There's a difference, and honestly, a small, almost shy smile crossed his face. I kind of like it. Jay made a sound between a laugh and a sob. You're insane. Maybe, Tom kissed him, gentle this time, nothing like the desperate collision from before. But I'm here, and I'm not leaving, so you're going to have to deal with that. And God help him, Jay wanted to believe it. Wanted to believe that Tom could actually want this, want him, want them, despite everything. But the guilt sat like a stone in his stomach, heavy and immovable. We should get you cleaned up, Jay said finally, because he couldn't process this, couldn't think past the immediate need to take care of what he'd done. And I should look at those marks, make sure you're okay. Tom nodded and let Jay help him up. They moved to the bathroom, and Jay wet a washcloth, cleaning Tom's skin with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Every mark he saw made the guilt worse. The bruises on Tom's hips where Jay had gripped too hard, the scratches across his shoulders, the bite mark on his neck that was already purpling. I'm sorry, Jay whispered again. I'm so sorry. Tom caught his hand. Stop apologizing, please. You're going to make me feel like I did something wrong by wanting you. You didn't do anything wrong, I did. We did something together, Tom insisted. Maybe it wasn't perfect, maybe it was messy and complicated, but it was ours, okay? Jay nodded, not because he believed it, but because Tom was looking at him with such hope, such certainty, that Jay couldn't bear to take that away from him. They ended up in Jay's bed eventually, both of them exhausted and wrung out. Tom curled into Jay's side, his head on Jay's chest, and Jay wrapped his arms around him carefully, terrified of causing more harm. I don't deserve you, Jay said into the darkness. Lucky for you I'm not going anywhere, Tom murmured, already half asleep. And Jay lay there, holding this man he'd violated, feeling the weight of his guilt press down on him like concrete. He'd destroyed this. He'd taken something that might have been good and beautiful and destroyed it with his lack of control. Tom might think he was okay now, might rationalize what had happened, but eventually he'd realize the truth. Eventually he'd understand that he'd been assaulted, and he'd hate Jay for it. And Jay would deserve every bit of that hatred. But for now, for this moment, Tom was warm and alive in his arms, his breathing steady, his body relaxed. And Jay held him like he was something precious, something fragile, something that Jay had already broken, but was desperate to protect anyway. Outside, the sun set on Crescent Bay, and neither of them noticed the small smile on Tom's face, the satisfaction in the curve of his lips. Phase 3 complete. Chapter 5, The Guilt Chain. Jay woke to the sensation of Tom's fingers tracing patterns on his chest, light and careful, as if he were memorizing the shape of Jay's body. For a moment, Jay let himself enjoy it. Then reality crashed back in, and the guilt returned with renewed force. He'd had sex with Tom. No, he'd assaulted Tom, no matter what Tom claimed, while his victim was under the influence of Enigma pheromones. The fact that Tom was still here, still touching him, still looking at him with something like affection in his eyes, only made it worse. Because it meant Tom had been so thoroughly affected by the pheromones that he'd bonded to Jay, had confused biological imperative with genuine desire. Morning, Tom said softly when he noticed Jay was awake. His voice was hoarse. From crying out last night, Jay remembered with fresh horror, and there were dark circles under his eyes. Morning, Jay managed. How are you feeling? Sore, Tom admitted with a small laugh that made Jay flinch. But okay, better than okay, actually. He leaned up and kissed Jay, soft and sweet, and Jay's hands came up automatically to cup Tom's face. It felt natural, right, like they'd been doing this for years instead of mere hours. Which was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. Tom, Jay said carefully, pulling back, we need to talk about what happened. Tom's expression shuttered slightly. Okay. Jay struggled to find the words. I need you to understand that what happened last night, I had no control. My pheromones overwhelmed you. You couldn't have consented. Jay, please let me finish. Jay's hands were shaking again. I know you think you wanted it, but that's what Enigma pheromones do. They override your will. They make you think you want things that you wouldn't normally want, and his voice cracked. I took advantage of that. I hurt you, and I need you to understand that if you want to report me, if you want to never see me again, I'll understand. I'll accept whatever consequences come from this. Tom was quiet for a long moment, his amber eyes studying Jay's face with an intensity that made Jay want to look away. Are you done? Tom asked finally. Jay nodded, not trusting his voice. Okay, now it's my turn. Tom sat up, pulling the sheet around his waist, and fixed Jay with a look that was surprisingly firm. I'm going to say this once, and I need you to actually hear me. Are you listening? Yes. I wanted you before last night. I've wanted you since the day we met. The pheromones didn't create that attraction. They just removed my inhibitions enough to act on it. Tom's hand found Jay's, squeezed. I'm not a child, Jay. I'm not some innocent beta who doesn't understand what Enigma pheromones can do. I knew what you were, I knew the risk, and I chose to stay. That was my choice. But you couldn't truly consent. Then neither could you, Tom interrupted. You lost control of your pheromones. Your Enigma nature took over. If I couldn't consent because I was under the influence of your pheromones, then you couldn't consent because you weren't in control of yourself, which means either we're both victims or neither of us are. Jay stared at him, the logic twisting his brain into knots. That's not. It's exactly the same, Tom insisted. You're holding yourself to a different standard because you're an enigma, but you're not a monster, Jay. You're just someone who had a biological reaction that you couldn't control, and I'm someone who chose to stay despite knowing the risks. He cupped Jay's face, forcing eye contact. I don't regret last night. I don't feel violated. I feel claimed, wanted, chosen, and I know that probably sounds fucked up given the circumstances, but it's the truth. Tom, I like you, Jay, a lot, and I want to try us, if you'll let me. But I can't do that if you're going to spend every moment hatting yourself for something I don't even consider a crime. Jay's chest ached. Tom's words were everything he wanted to hear, but accepting them felt like letting himself off the hook for something unforgivable. What if you change your mind? Jay whispered. What if in a week or a month or a year you realize what actually happened and you hate me for it? Then I'll tell you, Tom said simply, and we'll deal with it then. But right now, in this moment, I'm telling you that I want this. I want you. And I need you to decide if you're going to trust my judgment or if you're going to decide what I should feel for me. That stopped Jay cold, because Tom was right. By insisting that Tom couldn't have truly wanted this, Jay was taking away Tom's agency, was deciding for Tom what his experience had been. Which was its own kind of violation. I don't know how to do this, Jay admitted. I've spent so long being terrified of hurting someone that I don't know how to be in a relationship without that fear. Then we figure it out together, Tom said. We'll go slow, we'll communicate, and if you start to lose control again, we'll have a plan in place. But Jay, I need you to at least try, because I think we could be really good together. Jay looked at him, this slight beta with determination in his eyes and bruises on his skin that Jay had put there. And he made a decision that he knew was selfish, knew was probably wrong, but couldn't stop himself from making. Okay, Jay whispered. Okay, we'll try. Tom's smile was radiant. He kissed Jay again, deeper this time, and Jay let himself fall into it, let himself pretend that maybe, just maybe, this could actually work. He didn't notice the flicker of satisfaction in Tom's eyes. Didn't notice the way Tom's smile turned, calculating the moment Jay's eyes closed. Didn't notice that Tom's hands, running through his hair, trembled not with nervousness but with triumph. Because Tom had him now, the guilt chain was forged and locked in place. Every time Jay looked at Tom, he'd remember what he'd done. Every mark on Tom's skin would be a reminder of Jay's crime, and that guilt would bind Jay to Tom more effectively than any biological bond ever could. Jay would spend the rest of their relationship trying to make it up to Tom, would do anything, give anything, to prove he wasn't a monster. And Tom would use every bit of that guilt to shape Jay into exactly what Tom wanted him to be. It was perfect. The weeks that followed were some of the strangest of Jay's life. He and Tom fell into a relationship that felt both intensely right and deeply wrong. Tom moved some of his things into Jay's apartment, just to make things easier, and Jay didn't protest because it felt like the least he could do. Tom started accompanying Jay to his doctor's appointments, holding his hand through the suppressant adjustments, helping him track his symptoms. Tom was perfect, patient, understanding, never pushing for more than Jay was comfortable giving. He'd researched Enigma biology extensively, just to understand you better, he'd explained, and had strategies for helping Jay maintain control. Breathing exercises, meditation techniques, even aromatherapy that seemed to help calm Jay's fluctuating pheromones. And the sex, when they had it, was careful and controlled. Jay refused to let himself lose control again, kept his pheromones locked down even when it made his head pound and his hands shake. Tom never complained, never pushed, just accepted whatever Jay was comfortable with. It should have been perfect. But Jay couldn't shake the feeling that he was drowning. The guilt sat on his chest like a weight, crushing him slowly. Every time Tom smiled at him, every time Tom said, "I love you," which he'd started doing in the third week, casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world, Jay felt the weight press down harder. Because he didn't deserve this. Didn't deserve Tom's affection, Tom's patience, Tom's love. He'd forced Tom into this relationship through pheromone manipulation, and now Tom was just coping, rationalizing, making the best of a situation Jay had trapped him in. "You're thinking too loud," Tom said now, looking up from his laptop. They were in Jay's apartment. Their apartment, really, though Jay still couldn't quite think of it that way, and Jay had been staring at his economics textbook for the past 20 minutes without reading a single word. "Sorry," Jay muttered, "just distracted." Tom closed his laptop and moved to sit beside Jay on the couch. "Talk to me, what's wrong?" "Nothing, I'm fine." Jay, Tom's hand found Jay's, threaded their fingers together. "I can tell when you're spiraling, please talk to me." And because the guilt made it impossible for Jay to deny Tom anything, he said, I keep thinking about that night, about what I did to you." Tom's expression tightened, frustration flickering across his features. "Jay, we've talked about this. You didn't do anything to me." "I did," Jay insisted. "I lost control and I—" "Stop," Tom's voice was sharp enough that Jay fell silent. "Stop doing this. Stop trying to make yourself the villain in a story where you're not." "I don't know how," Jay whispered. "Tom, I don't know how to move past it." Tom was quiet for a moment, his jaw working like he was choosing his words carefully. Then he said, "Do you want to break up?" Jay's heart lurched. "What? No." "Then stop sabotaging us," Tom said, and there was an edge to his voice Jay had never heard before, something hard and cold. "Because that's what you're doing. You're so busy hatting yourself that you're not even present in this relationship. And I'm trying, Jay. I'm trying so fucking hard to show you that I want this, that I want you, but you won't believe me." "I'm sorry." "Stop apologizing." Tom stood abruptly, packing across the small apartment. "Just stop. I'm tired of the apologies, I'm tired of the guilt. I'm tired of feeling like I have to constantly reassure you that I'm not going to suddenly realize I was assaulted and run screaming." Jay flinched, the words hitting like physical blows. "Tom." "I'm not done." Tom whirled to face him, and his eyes were bright with what might have been tears or anger or both. "Do you know what it's like to care about someone who's convinced they're a monster? To try to build something with someone who thinks you're too stupid or too damaged to know your own mind?" "I don't think that." "You do. You act like I'm some fragile victim who needs to be protected from the truth of what happened. But I was there, Jay. I remember everything. And I chose it. I chose you. Why can't you accept that?" Because accepting it meant accepting that he wasn't completely irredeemable. Meant accepting that maybe, just maybe, he deserved something good. And Jay didn't know how to do that. "I'm sorry," he said again, helplessly. "I don't know how to be better at this." Tom's expression crumpled, anger giving way to something that looked like desperation. He crossed back to Jay, dropped to his knees in front of him, and took Jay's face in his hands. "Then let me help you," Tom whispered. "Please, Jay, let me help you learn to forgive yourself, because I can't do this alone. I can't carry both of us." And looking into Tom's eyes, seeing the genuine pain there, Jay made a decision. "Okay," he said softly. "Okay, I'll try. I'll really try." Tom's smile was watery but genuine. "That's all I ask." He kissed Jay, soft and sweet, and Jay kissed back, trying to pour every ounce of his apology and gratitude and confused, complicated feelings into the gesture. What he didn't see was the way Tom's eyes stayed open during the kiss, calculating and cold. What he didn't see was the small, satisfied smile that curved Tom's lips when they finally pulled apart. Because Tom had just secured another chain. The fear of abandonment, the knowledge that Tom was suffering because of Jay's guilt, the awareness that Jay's self-hatred was hurting Tom. Now Jay wouldn't just stay out of guilt, he'd stay out of obligation, out of the fear that leaving would damage Tom irreparably. It was beautiful, really, elegant. Tom had taken Jay's genuine guilt over the incident and weaponized it, had twisted it into something that would keep Jay trapped in this relationship indefinitely. And the best part, Jay would never realize it was a trap because he thought he was the one who'd done something unforgivable. Tom stood, pulling Jay up with him. "Come to bed, you look exhausted." And Jay, grateful for the excuse to stop thinking, followed. Chapter 6: The Escalation. Christmas break arrived with a snowstorm that blanketed Crescent Bay in white, and Tom suggested they stay in the city rather than visit their respective families. "I don't really have family to go back to," Tom had explained, which was technically true. His parents were dead, his foster families had never cared enough to maintain contact, and he had no siblings. And honestly, I'd rather spend the holidays with you. Jay had agreed immediately, feeling that familiar spike of guilt at the thought of Tom spending Christmas alone. So they'd stayed, had made the apartment festive with a small tree and string lights, had cooked an awkward, but ultimately successful Christmas dinner. It should have been perfect. But Jay's control was deteriorating again. The suppressants weren't working the way they used to. His doctor had warned him that sometimes Enigmas developed resistance to the medication, that they might need to try different combinations or protocols. But the alternatives were experimental, expensive, and carried risks that made Jay's current side effects look mild. His pheromones were leaking through constantly now, not in overwhelming bursts, but in a steady trickle that made alphas give him a wide berth and omegas visibly uncomfortable. He'd had to start wearing heavy-duty scent blockers that left chemical burns on his skin, and even those weren't entirely effective. Tom claimed it didn't bother him. "I'm a beta, remember, we're not as sensitive to pheromones," but Jay could see the effect it was having. Tom had started looking tired all the time, had lost weight, had developed a tremor in his hands that he tried to hide. And Jay knew why. Living in close quarters with an Enigma whose pheromones were constantly active was toxic, even for a beta. Tom's system was being overwhelmed slowly, constantly, by the biological warfare of Jay's existence. "I think we should take a break," Jay said one night in early January, the words torn from him by the sight of Tom's exhausted face. Tom looked up from his laptop, surprise flashing across his features. "What?" "A break from living together, maybe from the relationship entirely." Each word felt like pulling out his own teeth, but Jay forced himself to continue. "Tom, I'm killing you. Look at yourself, you're exhausted all the time, you've lost weight, you're not sleeping." "That's just stress from school." "It's the pheromones," Jay said flatly. "My pheromones, and they're only getting worse. My doctor said I might need to try a different protocol, which means the side effects are going to get worse before they get better. I can't do that to you." Tom closed his laptop, his expression hardening. "So you've decided what's best for me again?" "Tom." "No." Tom stood, and there was something in his posture that made Jay's Enigma instincts stir uneasily, something that didn't fit with his beta designation. "No, we're not doing this. You don't get to push me away because you've decided I can't handle being with you." "I'm not trying to push you away, I'm trying to protect you." "I don't need your protection." Tom's voice rose, sharp and cutting. "I need you to trust that I know what I'm capable of handling." "You're literally making yourself sick." "So are you," Tom shot back. "Those suppressants are destroying your body. You're taking medication that's slowly killing you, all because you're terrified of your own nature. At least my symptoms are reversible." Jay fell silent, the accusation hitting home. Tom was right, the suppressants were damaging Jay's endocrine system, his liver, his cardiovascular system. His doctor had been blunt about the long-term prognosis. If Jay stayed on Category 6 suppressants for more than another year or two, the damage would be permanent. He'd likely be dead before he turned 40. But the alternative was worse. The alternative was becoming the monster he'd always feared. "We're killing each other," Jay said quietly. "Is that really what you want?" Tom's expression crumpled. He crossed the space between them and took Jay's hands, his grip almost painful in its intensity. "What I want is you. All of you, not this half-alive version who's so busy suppressing himself that he can barely function." "Tom, what if you stopped taking the suppressants?" The words dropped like a bomb into the space between them. Jay stared at Tom, certain he'd misheard. "What?" "What if you stopped taking the suppressants?" Tom repeated, his eyes bright and intense, "or at least reduced them. Enough that your pheromones were manageable but not completely suppressed. Enough that you weren't destroying your body to be something you're not." "That's insane," Jay breathed. "Tom, you don't understand what would happen. My pheromones would be active all the time. I'd be dangerous." "To who, me?" Tom laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Jay, I've been living with your pheromones leaking through for months now. I think I can handle it." "You're developing symptoms." "Because you're suppressing so hard that when the pheromones do leak through, they come out in toxic bursts," Tom interrupted. "But if you weren't suppressing, if you just let them be present at a lower, consistent level, my body would adapt. I'd build up a tolerance." "That's not how it works." "It is for betas," Tom insisted. "I've done the research, Jay. Betas who live with Enigmas long-term do develop a tolerance to their pheromones. It's uncomfortable at first, but eventually the body adjusts. It's the spikes that cause damage, not the consistent exposure." Jay shook his head, panic rising in his throat. No, absolutely not. I won't risk hurting you. You're already hurting me, Tom's voice broke. Every day I watch you destroy yourself with those fucking pills, watch you hate yourself for existing, watch you treat your own nature like it's something evil that needs to be locked away. That hurts me, Jay. That hurts me more than any pheromones ever could. Tom, I love you, Tom said, and the words hit Jay like a physical blow. I love you, and I can't stand watching you do this to yourself anymore. So I'm asking, begging, please, try reducing the suppressants. Just try. If it doesn't work, if I can't handle it, then we'll figure something else out. But please stop killing yourself for me. Jay felt like he couldn't breathe. The thought of reducing his suppressants, of letting his Enigma nature have even a little bit of freedom, terrified him beyond reason. He'd spent his entire adult life locked down, controlled, suppressed. But looking at Tom's desperate face, hearing the pain in his voice, Jay felt his resolve crumbling. I'd need to talk to my doctor, he said finally, hatting how weak his voice sounded. Get their guidance on how to safely reduce the dosage. Okay, Tom said immediately. Yes, absolutely. We'll do it safely with medical supervision. Jay, please, let yourself live. And because Jay was weak, because the guilt of watching Tom suffer was too much, because some part of him desperately wanted to believe this could work, he nodded. Okay, he whispered. Okay, I'll try. Tom's smile was brilliant. He pulled Jay into a kiss that was desperate and grateful, and full of something that might have been love or might have been triumph. Jay kissed him back and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Tried not to notice the way Tom's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Tried not to see the satisfaction lurking in those amber depths. Because Tom had just secured the final piece of his plan. Jay's suppressants would be reduced, his pheromones would be more active, and when they were, Tom would finally be able to drop his own suppressants, just slightly, just enough, and let Jay's instincts start to sense what Tom really was. An enigma, a stronger enigma, an enigma who'd been manipulating this entire situation from the start. And by the time Jay realized the truth, it would be far, far too late. The trap would be sprung completely. And Jay would have no one to blame but himself. Chapter 7: The Shift. Jay's doctor was horrified by the suggestion of reducing his suppressants. Absolutely not, Dr. Singh said, her dark eyes stern behind her glasses. Jay, you're barely maintaining control at your current dosage. Reducing them would be incredibly dangerous. But what about building tolerance? Jay asked, hatting how desperate he sounded. If I'm exposed to my own pheromones consistently at lower levels, wouldn't my body adjust? That's not, Dr. Singh paused, her expression thoughtful. Where did you hear that theory? My boyfriend researched it. He's a beta, and he thinks that if he's exposed to consistent low-level pheromones rather than the toxic bursts I'm currently experiencing, he'd develop tolerance. Dr. Singh was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tapping against her desk. Theoretically, there's some merit to that idea. Beta exposure therapy has been used in some experimental treatment protocols, but Jay, the risk. Is it any worse than staying on Category 6 suppressants until they kill me? Jay interrupted. Because that's what you said would happen, that I have maybe 2 years before the damage is irreversible. Dr. Singh's expression tightened. I said that the long-term prognosis wasn't good, yes, but... So what's the alternative? I stay on medication that's slowly destroying my body, or I try something different that might actually let me live past 40. Dr. Singh sighed heavily. If we were to attempt this, and I'm not saying we should, it would need to be done incredibly carefully. Gradual reduction, weekly monitoring, and your boyfriend would need to sign extensive waivers acknowledging the risks. Hey, do it, Jay said immediately. Jay, Dr. Singh leaned forward, her expression grave. I need you to understand something. Enigma pheromones aren't just biologically active, they can be psychologically addictive. If we reduce your suppressants and your boyfriend is exposed to higher levels of your pheromones consistently, there's a risk that he'll become dependent on them, that his attachment to you will stop being genuine affection and start being biological compulsion. Jay's stomach dropped. You mean I'd be forcing him to stay with me? Not consciously, but the pheromones would make it incredibly difficult for him to leave, even if he wanted to. His body would crave your presence, your scent. It would be a form of addiction. This was exactly what Jay had feared. More proof that he was a monster, that any relationship he had would be built on biological coercion rather than genuine feeling. Then we can't do it, Jay said flatly. I won't risk that. There is one other option. Dr. Singh pulled up something on her computer. There's an experimental protocol being tested at a research facility in Oregon. It involves carefully controlled pheromone exposure combined with behavioral therapy. The goal is to help enigmas learn to modulate their pheromone output without complete suppression. It's shown promising results in early trials. How promising? About 60% of participants have been able to reduce their suppressant dosage by half while maintaining control. But Jay, it's intensive. You'd need to relocate to Oregon for at least 6 months, possibly longer, and there's no guarantee it would work for you. 6 months away from Tom, 6 months of intensive therapy and training, 6 months of being monitored and studied like a lab rat. But if it worked, he could actually have a life, a real relationship with Tom that wasn't built on guilt and fear. I'll think about it, Jay said finally. Dr. Singh nodded. In the meantime, I'm going to prescribe you a lower dose suppressant, category 5. We'll see how you handle it, and if your control remains stable, we can discuss further reductions. But Jay, if at any point you feel like you're losing control, you need to call me immediately. Understood? Understood. Jay left the appointment with a new prescription and a head full of conflicting thoughts. The Oregon program made sense, was probably the safest option, but the thought of leaving Tom for 6 months made his chest ache. Tom had become his anchor, the only person who made him feel like less of a monster. How could he leave that behind? When he got home, Tom was waiting, and the hope in his eyes made Jay's decision before he'd even consciously thought about it. She agreed to reduce the dosage, Jay said. I'll be on category 5 starting tomorrow. Tom's smile was radiant. He crossed the apartment and pulled Jay into a fierce hug. Thank you, God, Jay, thank you for trusting me with this. Jay held him close, breathing in his scent, and tried not to think about Dr. Singh's warnings about addiction and dependency. Tried not to notice that Tom's scent, usually bland and beta-neutral, had a strange undernote today, something sharp and electric that made Jay's Enigma instincts stir uneasily. Tried not to wonder why Tom's hands were shaking as he held on. The transition to category 5 suppressants was harder than Jay had anticipated. The first week was hell. Without the stronger medication holding his pheromones in check, they leaked out constantly, not in overwhelming bursts, but in a steady presence that made everyone around him uncomfortable. Students gave him wide berths in hallways. Professors looked at him warily. Even the campus barista, who'd always been friendly, now served him his coffee with trembling hands and averted eyes. But Tom weathered it better than Jay had expected. He stayed close, stayed calm, and while Jay could see the physical effects, the slight flush to his skin, the way his breathing would quicken when Jay's pheromones spiked, he didn't complain. You're doing great, Tom would say during the worst moments. When Jay felt like his skin was crawling with the effort of maintaining even minimal control. Just breathe, you've got this. And slowly, gradually, it started to get easier. By the 3rd week, Jay's control had improved significantly. His pheromones were still present, still noticeable, but he could modulate them better. Keep them at a low simmer rather than letting them boil over. And Tom seemed to be thriving. The exhaustion that had plagued him for months had faded. His color was better, his appetite had returned, and the tremor in his hands had disappeared. He seemed more energetic, more present, more alive than he had in weeks. See, Tom said one evening as they cooked dinner together, I told you my body would adapt. I feel better than I have in months. Jay wanted to believe it. Wanted to believe that this could actually work, that he could have his Enigma nature without destroying the person he loved. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't anything he could point to specifically, just small things. The way Tom's scent would occasionally shift, taking on that strange undernote that didn't fit with beta biology. The way Tom's eyes would sometimes go predatory when he looked at Jay, before smoothing back into their usual gentle warmth. The way Tom seemed to know exactly what Jay needed before Jay even realized he needed it, as if Tom could read his emotional state with unnatural accuracy. Jay told himself he was being paranoid, that the stress of reducing his suppressants was making him see threats that weren't there, that Tom was just incredibly perceptive and caring. But his Enigma instincts, no longer completely suppressed, whispered that something was wrong. It came to a head in early February, on a night when Jay's control slipped more than usual. They'd been arguing about what Jay couldn't even remember later. Something stupid, probably, but the stress had caused Jay's pheromones to spike, flooding the apartment with Enigma scent. Tom had gasped, his pupils dilating, his body responding immediately to the onslaught of pheromones. And Jay had felt it, felt his Enigma instincts roar to life, demanding he claim, dominate, possess. He'd backed away immediately, hands shaking. Tom, you need to leave. I'm losing control. No, Tom's voice was rough, affected by the pheromones but somehow still steady. I'm not leaving. Tom, I could hurt you. You won't. Tom stepped closer, and there was something in his eyes that made Jay's instincts scream, not in aggression but in recognition. Jay, listen to me. You're not going to hurt me. You need to trust that. How can you know that? Jay's voice cracked. The pheromones aren't as overwhelming as you think, Tom finished. He was standing directly in front of Jay now, close enough that Jay could feel the heat of his body. Jay, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you from the beginning. Jay's heart was pounding. What? Tom took a deep breath and then his scent changed. It shifted, morphed, intensified into something that made every hair on Jay's body stand on end. Because that scent wasn't beta neutral anymore. It was powerful, dominant, overwhelming. It was Enigma. No, Jay breathed, backing away until his back hit the wall. No, that's not, you can't be. I'm an Enigma, Tom said calmly, his beta disguise falling away like a shed skin. I have been the entire time. I've been on suppressants even stronger than yours, hiding what I am, but I think it's time we were honest with each other. Jay's mind was reeling. Tom was an enigma, had been an enigma this entire time, which meant. You lied to me, Jay said, his voice hollow. From the very beginning you lied. I omitted information, Tom corrected. There's a difference. You let me think I'd hurt you. Let me think I'd forced you, Jay's voice rose. You let me destroy myself with guilt over something that never actually happened. It did happen, Tom said, his expression hardening. You lost control. You flooded me with pheromones. You took me on your floor. Those are all facts. But you weren't a helpless beta who couldn't resist. You're an enigma. You could have fought back, could have stopped me. I didn't want to stop you, Tom interrupted. That's what you're not getting, Jay. I wanted it, all of it. I orchestrated the entire situation. The words hit Jay like physical blows. What? Tom smiled, and for the first time, Jay saw the predator beneath the gentle facade. I've been planning this since the day you transferred here. I read your file, learned what you were, and decided I wanted you. So I approached you as a harmless beta, made myself indispensable to your life, created situations that would increase your stress and reduce your control. And when you finally snapped, I made sure I was the target. Why? Jay's voice broke. Why would you do that? Because I knew that the guilt would bind you to me more effectively than any biological bond, Tom said, his voice matter of fact. An enigma who thinks they've forced someone into a relationship will do anything to make it up to them. Will stay forever out of obligation and shame. Will never leave, no matter how bad things get, because they believe they owe the other person their loyalty. Jay felt like he was going to be sick. You manipulated me. From the very beginning, you manipulated everything. Yes, Tom said simply. I did, because I wanted you, and I knew you'd never choose me willingly. You were too locked down, too terrified of your own nature. So I created a situation where you'd have no choice but to let me in. That's insane, Jay breathed. Tom, that's your. I'm exactly what you are, Tom interrupted. An enigma, a predator. The difference is that I've accepted what I am. I've learned to use my nature rather than suppress it, and I've claimed what I wanted, you. Jay's enigma instincts were in chaos, torn between aggression at the challenge, horror at the manipulation, and a terrible, awful understanding that he'd been played from the very start. The pheromone exposure therapy, Jay said slowly. You wanted me to reduce my suppressants so I could sense what you really were. Partially, Tom admitted, but also because I wanted to see the real you, the you without the suppressants crushing your personality, the you who's actually interesting rather than the half-dead puppet you've been pretending to be. I trusted you, Jay said, and hated how his voice trembled. I thought you cared about me. I do care about you, Tom said, and for a moment, genuine emotion flickered across his face. That's the problem, Jay. I care about you more than I've ever cared about anything. Enough to lie, manipulate, and twist everything to keep you. Because the alternative where you never let me in. Where you stayed locked down and alone, and slowly dying on those fucking suppressants, that was unacceptable. So you decided to torture me with guilt instead. I decided to give you a reason to stay, Tom corrected. A reason to let yourself be cared for. A reason to accept that you deserved something good, even if you had to believe you'd done something unforgivable to get it. Jay stared at him, trying to process the sheer scope of the manipulation. Every kindness, every gentle word, every moment of support, all of it calculated. All of it designed to trap Jay in a relationship he'd never consciously chosen. I should hate you, Jay said quietly. You should, Tom agreed, but you don't, because despite everything, despite the lies and manipulation, some part of you knows that I'm the only person who's ever truly understood what you are. The only person who doesn't see you as a monster. The only person who's ever wanted all of you, not just the sanitized, suppressed version. And that was the most horrible part, because Tom was right. Jay should hate him, should be furious at the manipulation, the lies, the months of orchestrated guilt. But looking at Tom now, his real face, his real nature, his Enigma presence finally unleashed, Jay felt something shift in his chest. Because for the first time since he'd presented as an Enigma at 16, Jay wasn't the most dangerous thing in the room. For the first time in his life, he was with someone who matched him, someone who understood him, someone who wasn't afraid of what he was. Someone who'd wanted him so badly that they'd spent months orchestrating an elaborate psychological manipulation just to keep him. It was sick, it was twisted, it was unforgivable. And Jay couldn't make himself walk away. I hate you, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. No, you don't, Tom said softly, stepping closer. His Enigma scent wrapped around Jay, and Jay's instincts responded, recognizing another apex predator, recognizing a mate. You're angry and you're hurt and you feel betrayed, but you don't hate me, because if you did, you'd have already left. I'm going to leave, Jay insisted. I'm going to pack my things and go where? Tom asked. Back to suppressants that will kill you by 40. Back to being alone and terrified of your own nature. Back to a life where everyone sees you as a monster. Yes, Jay said desperately. That's better than this. Is it? Tom was right in front of him now, close enough that Jay could feel the heat of his body, could smell the complex layers of his Enigma scent. Is being slowly poisoned by medication and crushing loneliness really better than being with someone who understands exactly what you are? Someone who's walked the same path, made the same choices, lived with the same fear. Someone who manipulated and lied to me for months. Someone who wanted you enough to risk everything, Tom interrupted. Jay, do you have any idea how dangerous this was for me? If you'd figured out what I was before I was ready to tell you, my entire life would have been destroyed. My carefully constructed identity, my safety, everything. I risked all of that because I wanted you. That doesn't make it okay. I know, Tom's hand came up to cup Jay's face, and Jay's traitorous body leaned into the touch. I know it doesn't, I know I'm probably irredeemable, but Jay, I'm yours, completely, utterly yours, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving that to you if you'll let me. Jay's breath caught, because Tom's pheromones were wrapping around him now, complex and layered and powerful. And underneath all the manipulation, all the lies, Jay could sense something genuine, a desperate, possessive need that matched his own. Tom had manipulated him, had lied to him, had orchestrated months of psychological torment. But Tom had also stayed when everyone else had fled, had weathered Jay's pheromones when they should have driven him away, had learned everything about Enigma biology just to understand Jay better. Tom was a monster, but so was Jay. And maybe two monsters could build something together that neither could have alone. I'm still angry, Jay said finally. I'm furious at you, and I don't know if I can ever fully trust you again. I know, Tom said softly. But I'm not leaving, not tonight, maybe not ever. Jay's hand came up to cover Tom's, pressing it more firmly against his face. Because you're right, I've never met anyone who understands what I am. And despite everything, despite all the manipulation, some part of me has been waiting my entire life for someone like you. Tom's smile was slow and satisfied and dangerous. So where does that leave us? I don't know, Jay admitted, but I think we need to figure it out together. The real us this time. No more lies, no more manipulation. Just two enigmas trying to build something real. I can do that, Tom said. Though fair warning, I'm probably going to be possessive and controlling, and generally difficult to deal with. Hiding my nature for years has given me some problematic coping mechanisms. Same, Jay said with a bitter laugh, so I guess we're both disasters. Perfect disasters, Tom corrected, and then he kissed Jay, not the careful, controlled kisses of their previous relationship, but something fierce and claiming and real. And Jay kissed back, his own Enigma nature finally rising to meet Tom's, no longer suppressed or hidden or ashamed. For the first time in his life, Jay let himself be what he was. And it was terrifying, and liberating, and utterly, completely inevitable.